Welcome to Beyond the Borders podcast,
where every story is a journey and every journey is an inspiration.
Beyond the Borders is all about highlighting the incredible cross-cultural stories that exist in our communities.
We want to provide a platform for their story to shine because they are so important in today's world.
These stories not only celebrate the diversity of human experience,
but also foster empathy, understanding, and connection.
Our mission here is to amplify these voices, so stick around and join us as we explore these stories throughout the season. Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Borders podcast. Thank you for joining into this episode. Today we have with us Jessi Kalambayi. We're really excited to be talking with her today, so thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Rossi, your one and only amazing host right here. I'm happy to be with you all.
Yeah. All right, guys. My name is Joe. I'm happy to be here with you guys and to be talking to Jessi for sure.
And I forgot to tell y'all, but you already know. My name's Natalie. Thanks for joining us. Over to you, Jessi, to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jessi Kalambayi. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, was raised in South Africa, and I am in America. So I'm a model. I work as a program manager within the refugee space and just an advocate for human rights. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me, honestly.
Hey, of course, girl. Thank you for joining us. Just as you gave your intro in your bio, we already noticed that you mentioned, 3 different countries. And we know that there is that term third culture kids, right? So would you consider yourself a third culture kid? And if so, could you tell us a little bit more about the experience of growing up as a third culture kid and what that's been like for you?
Yeah, so I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but very little of my life was spent there. We left when I think it was less than a year old, and most of my life was spent in South Africa. I lived in Durban, South Africa. If those who don't know, South Africa is where Nelson Mandela comes from. Right, just so you know. Icons only.
Yes.
But so I grew up in Durban, South Africa, and I lived until I was about 18 years old, and then we moved to the United States. Through a program called the Diversity Visa Lottery Program, which was an amazing opportunity because it gave us the opportunity to get a green card to come here. And so another about 7-8 years of my life has been spent here in Denver, in Colorado. And so because of that, I was raised Congolese through my Congolese family. However, not growing up in close proximity to being in Congo, especially when it comes to environment, language, culture, it definitely means that my identity was a little bit different from the average Congolese woman who particularly lived and was raised in Congo. I did identify as Congolese, however, was legally South African. And so I did also identify as South African because that was my home. That was what I knew. And that was the culture and the environment that I was surrounded by. And so if anybody has me on Instagram, one thing that's on my bio is Congolese by nature, South African by nurture, because I feel like that truly encompasses who I am. And then also, I came here at 18 years old, so I feel like I came here young enough to kind of get adapted to the culture, but also old enough to still feel like everywhere that I grew up is still a part of who I am. And so it's definitely interesting having those 3 different identities. It's confusing on some days because whenever I travel outside of Denver, people will ask me, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like, do I answer where I'm ethnically from, where I'm legally from, or do I answer where I came from in the U.S.?
Yeah.
And so it's very, very interesting having to deal with kind of those identity issues, but it is something that I find to be very beautiful and unique about myself. So shout out to third culture kids.
Definitely. And I think that I definitely relate to that experience in a lot of ways, especially when people are like, where are you from? And mentally you're like, okay, I'm Congolese, or I'm Ghanaian. Or, it's always this kind of disclaimer, and then how do I introduce myself without telling everybody all of my business? In this 1 second, because I just had one question, and sometimes when you answer it, they're like, I really didn't need to know all of that. I was just asking, So that's always a very interesting experience to have. And you mentioned that you came here when you were 18, and I got to know you 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
And so also when you were still pretty new, and you are kind of still pretty new. And so I think that one thing that was a common misconception for people that I know have encountered you have been like, oh, she's been here forever, or she's been here for a long time, just because of how you sound, right? So what has that been like? We talked about assumptions in a previous interview that we did, and what kind of assumptions do you feel like people have about you when you open your mouth, or when they see you, or when they talk to you, and what do you like? Obviously, it's not your job to carry or do anything about those assumptions, right? But just what are some assumptions that are out there that maybe frustrate you even, or make you feel away?
I think one of the things that people, when I first came, people assumed about me was, one, I was not directly from South Africa. My first job when I came here, when I was still waiting to go into college, I worked at Virgin America as a customer service agent. So I was one of those people on the phone like, hi, this is Virgin America. How can I help you? I still got that in the back of my head clearly. But I worked with Virgin America. So oftentimes people would assume that I wasn't African, even though I had just gotten there maybe, 3-4 months ago. And so because of that, people would often question like, oh, you speak English so well. Where did you learn English? And I would be like, okay, if you know anything about South Africa, we are an English-speaking country. So it's not necessarily something that's foreign to me to speak English and let alone speak it well. Because oftentimes in the media, the assumption is that African people have a very specific accent, a very specific way of speaking. And when you don't fit into that mold, they have to question why. Why do you not fit into that stereotype idea of what I have as an African? And because I was not that in the sense of, for example, things like the media, things that most Americans grew up watching. I also grew up watching as well, like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, SpongeBob, Barbie, all of that I grew up watching as well, because South Africa, as it's not a westernized country, but we do have a lot of Western media that we consume as well. So a lot of things wasn't too much of a big difference for me. And so with that, people were very, very confused, trying to figure out, oh, maybe she grew up in the suburbs. Now, I did live in the suburbs, of course, but I also lived in the city as well for a small part of my life. And so I do believe that because of that, I'm very multifaceted in many ways. But people will always assume that when you're African, you're straight from Africa, you're supposed to speak a certain way, you're supposed to look a certain way, you're supposed to act a certain way. And when you don't fit into that, they're not quite sure where to box you, where to place you. So I definitely had some very, very interesting interactions with people when I would go into Uber and say like, okay, like, how do I really interact with this person who I can't really quite put in a box? And so I've also dealt with that, not just with Americans, but also within people, my own community, kind of going back to that identity issue, where some people would say because I spoke with a particular accent that I might be more whitewashed. And really, it's just because I maybe use more just standard English in comparison to, say, using vernacular English, for example. And so some people might assume that because of that, I'm more white, have more proximity to whiteness than not, which is actually not the case. I have always had diverse friend groups. I've always been in very, very diverse communities. And so that accent thing does definitely kind of hit people the wrong way, but I also don't particularly care for what people think about me, because I do believe, again, every part of where I've been and I've lived is the reason why I am the way that I am today. And if people can't seem to figure it out, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think, like, I mean, that's another place where we both relate in that, especially even amongst other Africans, right? Like, there are these spaces when we're with other Africans where they're like, no, you're so white. Like, they just like, you're so white, you know?
Yeah.
Because we speak a certain way, or we do certain things a certain way, or like engaging with certain activities that people like are not for Africans.
Yes.
I think that like those boxes have been projected on Africans, and then we've also allowed it to happen. Like, we also are like, yeah, that makes sense, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I grew up doing ballet, you know, people were always like, oh, you did ballet? That's so white. And I'm like, like, I'm just like, this doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Like, who said it's for white people? And I think, why do we allow ourselves also to be like, yeah, these things are for white people and these things are for black people? Like, who does that really benefit in the end? Because it further disadvantages us. Yeah, right? When we do that, we're allowing people to put us in that box, and we're staying in it. So
yeah, and I think it does monopolize us as a people. Black people are not monoliths. We are completely different in many ways. I think all of us have very different cultural experiences, the way that we view lives and perspectives, and things that we enjoy. Someone might like dogs as a black person, another person doesn't like dogs, and that's perfectly okay. Someone might know how to swim and some others don't, you know, and that's perfectly okay. But oftentimes, because when you don't fit into that little mold, then people have to question why. They're like trying to figure you out.
And they use that to justify it, right? Like, yeah, oh, that's why. Or like, even for the way you speak, right? Like, when you came here and you were like, oh, I'm from South Africa, they're like, oh, that's why you're not like other Congolese people, or you don't sound like other Congolese. You know what I mean? Like that.
I have a very funny story about that.
Oh, tell us.
Yeah, tell us.
So, back to working for Virgin America. Customer service is definitely a traumatic experience. All the best thoughts and prayers to all those who do work in customer service. God's strongest shoulders, really. I worked in customer service. I had an instance where I answered the phone. So we had two offices at the time. One was in Denver, one was in Dallas. And I picked up the phone, and this lady immediately is irate. She's upset. She's making all these accusations about somebody stealing her money and all these different things. And I get on the phone. Obviously, I have to de-escalate, try to figure out how can I help her out, because I am customer service. That's my job. I asked her, and I say, hey, how can I help you? And she's really upset. She's like, I want to speak to a white person. I do not want to speak to anybody who is black, because the last person was African American and she stole my money. And she was like, I think, but I think you sound like you're European. I don't think you're not African American, right? And I said, well, sorry, but I'm African. Sorry to disappoint. And she made this assumption because of my accent, because I sounded European. Or I didn't sound like a stereotypical African, at least what they believe to be stereotypical, that she thought that she could get away with making some very derogatory accusations against somebody else. And so it has happened multiple times where I'm on the phone and people can't see me, but they can hear me, and they make this false connection of who I am. And I'm like, well, sorry to disappoint, but I'm not. Yeah. And it's okay. You don't have to particularly speak a certain way to be Black. You could speak AAVE and you're still Black. You could speak, particularly when you're still Black, I feel like it doesn't take away anything from my identity.
Absolutely. And I think just before I pass it over to you, in another interview that we did, I was saying that same thing where I had spoken to somebody on the phone. My name's Natalie. Your name's Jessi. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Very
very generic.
Unless you think our last names, which also don't always do that much. But I was on the phone with somebody, said my name's Natalie, and they were coming over to do housework. And so when they got there, they were like, "Hi, I'm looking for Natalie," and I was like, "Yeah, hello." And they were like, they walked in, they looked me up and down, and they were like, "Oh, okay." And they were like, "Oh, are you from around here?" And I was like, "Yeah, born and raised here." And they were like, "Oh, you don't have the accent." And I'm like, and this is in Arizona, the Southwest of America. There's no accents, What he was trying to tell me was, you don't sound like a Black person, or what I think a Black person is supposed to sound like, So these projections that happen in these boxes. So I think that, like you're saying, like it's really important for us to just live unconditionally and unapologetically as ourselves.
Yeah.
And just be like, you know what? Like, whatever you think about me, it's for you.
That's all I know.
I am who I am. And if you don't like it, that's your own problem.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, Jessi, in your introduction, we're talking about, being a model. And I think one of the most important thing that we usually, growing up as African and having this like cultural norm and things that we have to like abide by, right?
Yeah.
Like for you, growing up in a household where, you have African parents, right? You are African. And then how was it for you when your parents were saying, I want to be a model. I want to be, Miss USA. I want to do all this thing. Like, what was the conversation in the household with like everything they wanted to do?
It was a series of conversations, I think. Generally, most people who've grown up in an African household, they understand there's very, very strict cultural norms and things that are considered to be the norm in society that once you step outside of that, you're almost asking yourself to either be shunned or to be looked down upon or to be seen as rebellious. I've always particularly been someone who believes in dreams and dreaming big. And from a young age, because I always grew up kind of very slender and tall, it was always people always projected on me that I should be a model. But outside of that, I wanted to, because I used to obsessively watch fashion TV and all these different like amazing models that I grew up watching. And I wanted to be like them, similar, just kind of like taking on that beautiful role, just being able to embody some of his creations. So it was definitely difficult because there is a certain stereotypical lifestyle that people tend to associate with models, whether it is drinking and whatever it may be that considered to be very, very out there and outside of the norm. It was hard for my parents who knew of that to accept that their daughter would potentially be exposed to it. Not only exposed, but potentially fall into that line. And so naturally, of course, they were afraid. They did not want me to be exposed to that. They wanted to shelter me. They wanted to protect me. But I always knew that I was always a very disciplined person. You couldn't make me do what I didn't want to do. Yes, obviously peer pressure exists, but I think for myself, there were things that I just didn't feel comfortable with. I think I knew to have I would stand my ground for the most part. So I knew that if I was stepping into this world that I could stand my ground, and I've done that up until this very moment. And if there were things that I'm not comfortable with, I would just say no. And so having that conversation with my parents and making them understand this is something I want to do, this is something that I love, and I want to give myself a chance to explore because I do believe that I'm talented. I believe that I have something to offer. It took some time. When I initially introduced it, they were like, no, no, tu peux pas faire ça. And like, no, you can't do it because, you're going to do this, you're going to wear this, you're going to do that. But I think my parents kind of like watched me as I evolved, whether it was in school or anything that I did. And they knew that I was very, very disciplined. And they also saw how I conducted myself. And I think that built a sense of trust in me that I would make the right decisions, because not to say I've always made the right decision. Come on now. But, I'll be honest, I'm definitely still human. But I do feel as though they trusted me enough to know that I would always do what was best. And I did that. And so once they finally kind of warmed up to it, I think it was more so around the time where they thought that the best medium was to introduce me to commercial work. So at 14, the idea of kind of going into like TV adverts and things like that was introduced. We went to a commercial agency in Durban at the time, and they saw how the agents loved me. Everybody got their pictures taken, but me, they were all up in my face taking pictures, and they were like, oh, this girl clearly has something that they're looking for. So that kind of opened up their eyes to think, okay, maybe she could probably give this a try. So, but obviously they would still kind of watch exactly what I was doing. So from that moment on, I started doing more like commercial work, like TV adverts and things like that, and extras and whatever. But because I was a minor, obviously I'd be restricted. Anything that I had to do, they would have to be restricted on. They would have to give their permission for. I remember there was one time that definitely gave them a bit of a shocker. My agent had sent me out to do a casting. This was for a movie. Now, I was never an actress, but because you do commercial work, there's some acting roles that might come up. And there was a specific movie that I'm not going to name that I was supposed to audition for. And I guess the storyline had to do with also similar to the transatlantic slave trade. And I believe I was going to be, I think, a slave or something of that sort. And I was a minor at the time, so it was definitely a very, very intense role. And in one of the roles, one of the scenes, I would be sexually assaulted on camera. And I would also be topless. Mind you, I was probably like 15 or something at this point. Immediately no. Immediately no. Especially now as an adult, I'm like, immediately no. But my parents did such a great job of immediately staying. Like, they took me to the casting just to hear what the director had to say about what the role would be like. But they knew that introducing me to that world, even if it gave me some sort of fame or notoriety, it was not a good space for me, not only as a minor, but also just as far as my identity and protecting me. And so that was obviously something that was taken off my hands. And from then on, for a couple of years, I didn't go to any like adverts or any castings of that sort. But when I was about 16, 17, now actual modeling gigs started coming up and opportunities to go to castings and things like that. And so my very first casting, I went for my mom. And at that time, I didn't know how to walk in heels, so I didn't do very good. But when I came back the next year, when I finished high school, I was like, you know what? I'm done with high school. I know we're about to move to America. I want to give myself a chance to give this a try. And so I kind of went and did it anyways. And I went to a casting. I got submitted into this program, and they trained me, and I went through like a series of different gigs and things like that. And then I ended up winning an award as the best new face. And my parents got to watch me for the first time modeling. And that was the point where they were like, actually, she deserves to do something like this. I think they saw that I was not only that I loved what I did, but they saw that I was good at what I did. And they wanted to support me on that. And I think my parents have always tried their best to be very, very supportive. Of course, they're going to protect me. And I think African parents have the best intentions. They do want to protect us. They want to raise us up in the best environment. But oftentimes, because, you know, the world has its harms and its evils, it's very, very easy to get carried away. So we do sometimes have to give our African parents grace for that they really don't mean any harm. Obviously, there's some who could have done things a little bit better than others, but they don't mean any harm. So I'm grateful that even though it was not the norm to put myself in such an environment, but my parents still supported me. Now, of course, what it also means is that now I definitely do have to take some decisions that I'm aware that might be completely out of the norm and really putting myself out there. But I also do believe we shouldn't restrict ourselves, because I'm a firm believer that if God wants me to do something, I'm going to go ahead and do it, even if it's considered to be out of the norm. I strictly believe that African women oftentimes are expected to look a particular way and pursue certain pathways. And it's very easy for us to think, you know what, I'm just not going to do this because it's not the norm. But I don't believe that we should restrict ourselves that way. So I'm perfectly okay with
that's actually like
doing the opposite.
It's inspiring.
Yeah.
As I'm listening to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You actually doing everything that you are supposed to do.
Yes.
And your parents are proud of you, right?
Very
you are not
so.
only a model, but you're also like doing your master at University of Denver.
Yes.
And like all this thing, I want you to look straight at the camera and tell the little girls and African girls that will be watching this,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe one of them will be inspired by your story.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have to tell them in terms of, parenting wise, like they shouldn't be, mad at their parents, or like what do you have to tell them?
To the little girls watching who probably look at me and are probably inspired by my courage or my fearlessness. Trust me, I'm very, very scared. Let me just tell you that. But one thing I've always lived by and that I've actually adopted as a motto is to just do it scared. Because if you don't allow yourself to do something because you're afraid of what people will think, you're afraid of what the community will think, you're never going to actually reach your ultimate potential. It's very, very easy to kind of stay and live according to what is the norm, because you're worried about what your parents may think. But sometimes African parents just need a little bit of a nudge, to see that you actually could really, really be good at what you want to do. So meet your parents halfway. Okay, talk to them, be open and honest with them. Let them know why is it that you want to do something. And don't let it be something that's a vain reason. It has to be a true reason, like something that is true to you. Why do you want to do exactly what it is that you want to do? I always ask, well, what is your why? Once you figure out what your why is, if you can convince your parents to support you, honestly, everybody else doesn't really matter. For me, that's kind of how I abide. If my parents can support me and they're proud of me, then that's what I care about. And so don't be afraid to pursue things that are out of the norm or what it's like to be a good African girl, because we're often looked at, whatever you do should prepare you to be a good wife. You can be a good wife and still be a president. You can be a good wife and still be a model. You can be a good wife and still be Miss USA. So my last words, just do it. Just do it scared, okay?
Just do it.
Scared. If you're not scared, then do it not scared. You're not scared.
Okay, Nike, sponsor me.
Even if you're not scared, then still do it.
Right.
I think that, like you said, there's a lot of expectations as African women, as Black women, placed on us to be a certain thing, a certain way, especially as little African girls. I mean, that whole idea of, oh, you don't cook? How are you going to get a husband? Child, like, or all of these things, or you need to learn how to do X, Y, and Z because of a man. Like, no, I don't. So I do it for myself,
Absolutely.
And just talking about, now that we're talking about your parents and the fact that they're supportive, you mentioned that one of your passions is working in refugee resettlement, and that you currently work in refugee resettlement. That's how we all know each other.
Yeah.
Resettlement space. But how do you kind of juxtapose working in a resettlement space, a space that is so heavy on human rights, to also being a part of a world that is a little bit very, quote unquote, maybe superficial or not necessarily concerned with the things that are happening in the lives of the people that we're engaging with? And I think sometimes can be a little bit detached from these two things. So how do you kind of juxtapose those two things, and how do you make it work for you in your life and experience?
That's a great question. I've always kind of felt detached between the two, because as a model, I loved what I did, but I also always felt like I was more than just a co-hanger. The co-hanger is a very, very common phrase that most models actually know about. If you're a model, you know what a co-hanger is. So I always felt like I always had opinions. If you know one thing about me, I got something to say.
We know, girl.
I always got something to say.
As you should.
And so I've always felt as though, even though I love being a model, I love being able to represent somebody else's ideas, I also kind of wanted to remind myself that I actually do really care about the world and what's happening around me. The fashion world, it's beautiful, but it can also be very, very superficial, just as you said. It's very vain. And there's a lot of things that happen within the fashion world that completely detach from actually what's happening. I mean, we see like the Met Gala happening on one end, and then in the other end of the world, there's a lot of like war and trauma that's happening. And so it can be very, very difficult to live in a world where you're kind of at both ends of the spectrum. But I feel like it's actually the reason why I went into pageantry. So currently I'm Miss Denver USA, and I'm excited to be competing for Miss Colorado USA in June of this year. It's my very first time. And I felt like pageantry was actually the perfect medium between the two, because it allows women to, one, show that we are multifaceted. One, because pageantry is not just about the beauty. Yes, you wear beautiful gowns and you got the best makeup and hair, but then you also get to advocate for something that's important to you. You get to talk about causes that you feel are particularly important. And I felt like it gave me kind of like the best mix of both worlds, because that's who I am. I've always told myself, if I had a perfect job, that perfect job would be a model ambassador of like a nonprofit organization. And so I always felt like that's who I am. I don't want to feel like those things are not mutually exclusive, because I feel like we can be different things at the same time. And so it's always important that even if I'm in the fashion world, I'm still talking about things that are important to me. Anybody who's probably been backstage with me, I'm probably going to talk about something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't be the one person who's going to have opinions about something that's happening around me. And does it make some people uncomfortable? I'm sure it does. But it is something that I care about and is true to me. And I bring that back into the nonprofit world that I work in. I started working in refugee resettlement by happenstance because I wanted to be an immigrations attorney, because I'm an immigrant. And so immigration reform and being kind of like understanding like the systems that affect refugees and migrants is something that's important to me. But what ended up happening was I got mentored by somebody who advised me, you might just give refugee resettlement a try. And I did. And I loved it. I really loved providing direct service through programs. And I got fortunate enough to work my way up to where I am now. And so I really, really want to ensure that even if I'm in this very superficial world, seemingly, I'm still not forgetting why I'm here. I really do believe that even if I end up as like the super high fashion model who graces the cover of Vogue or something, that I'm bringing my cause with me. Like my fame or whatever it is that I might get from this is not for me, but it's for what I can achieve through it. And so for me, I really, really do hope that I can conjoin those two worlds. And that's why, again, I'm going into pageantry. I think it's going to provide me with those platforms. So I think that, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. That's mentioned very well. Yeah.
So, Jessi, you mentioned you came here at 18.
Yes.
For just like people who come here, I have a question. Like, when you came here at 18, what was like happening in your mind? Like, what were your fears and motivations? Like, you're here, you're excited, you have a shot, like in becoming a model. Now you're here in the US, there are a lot of opportunities.
Yes.
So like, what goes on in your mind?
I'll be honest. Most people are like, yeah, I was dreaming of coming to the US. I didn't. And no shade.
Yeah, but
for me, it was more so because I knew that I would have to rebuild friendships, communities, and rebuild from scratch. And most immigrants who have to move to a new country are having to do that. And especially if you're, for example, a refugee who doesn't speak the language, you have to do that and have to deal with the linguistic challenges that comes with that. So at 18, I was very hyper aware of what that change would be like. So I wasn't like the happiest person to come to the US. I was grateful, but I wasn't super excited. I was very sad to leave my friends. I was very sad to leave my community. But I was also afraid of kind of what that would mean, like rebuilding my life. I was excited to have access to all these opportunities that I have. And I'm very grateful to God that He brought me here and the doors that is open for me, because I truly believe that it may not have been the same had I lived in South Africa up until this point. But I also do know that it was quite a challenging journey, knowing that I have to find now my new identity in this new country. Again, going back to the thing of identity, of trying to figure out, even in South Africa, even though I was South African, I always didn't quite feel South African. And I think if you know anything about kind of what's happened in South Africa from like 2008, xenophobic attacks against other Africans, there was still a sense of lack of belonging that happened there. And so that was my home. It's always going to be my home. But that lack of belonging was what made me a little bit more fearful, and knowing that I'll have to deal with that again. Coming here, most people who grew up here have already their childhood friends, their community friends, their church friends established, and I'm having to come here and rebuild that again. It definitely made me afraid. Not knowing the systems, navigating a new country is not easy. At 18 years old, you're young enough to get integrated, but old enough also to now have to like figure out adulting as a young adult. And so I was definitely afraid of that. And also because when I moved, I graduated high school in December of 2015, because we have like the January to December school year. So I took a gap year, and then I knew that I would also be a little bit behind as far as everybody else going to college. So I was really sad about that. And I had to wait another year to be in-state resident to get, affordable tuition. So that was also another fear. I was like, oh, I'm going to be left behind. Everybody else is moving forward with their lives. But looking back, I don't regret it. I think God had me exactly what He needed to me at the exact perfect time. And so those fears were very natural and true fears that most people would have. But once you go through, you realize, you know what, it's okay. I survived. Did I die? No. So yeah, there's a lot of fears that happened. But I think I overcame them. And I'm very proud of myself for navigating that at 18 with just my parents. I just came here with my parents, not my siblings. I have 3 other brothers who live in the UK. So also on top of that, there was a lot of isolation, having to rebuild a community, and also doing that without other people who are literally an extension of you. And that was my siblings. So dealing with that loneliness and that isolation was really, really hard. But I feel like I overcame, and I'm proud of where I am now.
So, okay, good. I was going to follow up with like, what made it all easier for you, like as you went on?
I think one is my parents, of course. My parents have always supported me. I'm always going to say that. Like, they really made sure that I focused on the things that I was supposed to focus on. Like, when I went to school, they made sure that was my number one focus, and it helped me get to where I am. So I'm very, very grateful for that. The little friends that I made along the way, sometimes the friendship sticks, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. It's a part of kind of growing. But I think I always had somebody who supported me along the way. I do think I am a very, very hyper independent and self-sufficient person that there was a lot of times I navigated things completely alone. Like college was navigated for the most part by myself. But I really do feel that the people who helped me along the way were really, really supportive. And more than anything, I think I'm a woman of faith. So God really was the one person that sustained me. I think if I didn't have God, I probably would, I would have been on the side of the street somewhere doing something. I don't know. But I really do feel that God has really been the reason that has helped me get through all these things every single year. Like there are times where I would cry myself to sleep because I'm like, I just want to go home. Like, no, you don't. Like I'm very, very grateful to be here. So it truly is the community that I found along the way. And some of the people are in this room. But just the community, my parents, my family, and more than anything, it's been God.
Nice.
No, I was going to ask the same question. It's fine. Yeah. It's I think mine was more so about the loneliness, and you already asked her. What makes you get up every day, and I think you already spoke about it. It's God, your parents, and your community, and I think that's one of the things that we kind of like. A lot of immigrants who immigrant refugee who don't have this luxury of like growing up with a family and community, and they grow up being lonely, right? And that is the loneliness that America is already like country of where like people are just being individual or individualism, all this thing. It's kind of like it take a huge toll on like Africans who came to the US and having to restart their life from the beginning. So
especially because African culture is so communal, it's one of those things where it's like if we were in South Africa, or if we were in Congo or in Ghana or Central African Republic, or any of the countries that we all come from, it's a little bit easier to establish community with one another and to know that if I need something, I can call this person and they can show up for me. And in America, it's like you call somebody, like, I have to work. Like, I can't help you. I'm busy, Like, I have bills to pay. Like, I can't give you money because I have my own things to take care of, And so the dynamic is definitely different. And I think that communal aspect, it can go missing here,
Yeah. And I really admire that about our community. I think one thing about Africans, we're going to show up for each other. I think because we truly do believe, what is the saying? It takes a village to raise a child, and it truly does take a village. I definitely remember being raised by a village everywhere that I went, and even here, yes, it was definitely very isolating. However, I always had a village at some point, whether it was at church, whether it was just people that you met through school, the African Student Union. In college, I was a president. But it definitely is that community aspect that I truly admire about Africans, and I'm sure many other cultures do relate to that as well. But going back on the point of like isolation and loneliness, I think this also does go back to kind of like mental health as well. I can't imagine the mental health of people who have to come here and do it completely on their own. Through my program, I get to meet so many different people who talk to me about their very, very interesting, sometimes very traumatic stories about their migration to the United States, whether it is just through like interesting canals through South America or Central America, or whether it is just kind of like the normal ride coming directly from Africa. And there's a lot of trauma that can happen along the way, especially for refugees who come from like so many different types of background for the reason why they may have fled persecution. And the mental health aspect is something that is often not spoken about, especially within the African community. I can only speak for Africans because I am African, but within our community, things like mental health is oftentimes stigmatized. And it's not something that's openly spoken about. I'm dealing with depression, I'm dealing with anxiety or PTSD. And so having to navigate that whilst also navigating a new system in a new country, and maybe sometimes in a language just not yours, a culture that's not yours, it can be extremely, extremely difficult. And so I hope that even though we are providing that community, we're also providing mental health support as well. Like recognizing that somebody may be showing symptoms of something that may be a mental health illness, and they should be able to get the resources without feeling shamed for it, because that's unfortunately something that we do. Are you dealing with mental health illness? That is a white people thing, but we all know it's not, because I'm pretty sure we all know an African who is showing clear signs of something that maybe their mental health is debilitating, and so it's something that we don't talk about. But yes, moving to a new country, there's just so much change that happens overnight, and we don't think about the invisible changes that you're having to deal with as well. And so hopefully mental health is something we can talk about a little bit more, especially within migrant community and refugees as well.
And actually, in every single interview that we've done so far, every single conversation that we've had, mental health has been a common thread that's come up. I'm about to start coining it mental health minutes.
So,
So we like specify aside, you know, in every episode we have mental health minutes because it's something that I think like our generation of Africans, just in general, whether you're, you know, born on the continent, born in the diaspora, like wherever you're engaging as an African, it's something that we know there's a gap for, you know. And like I say, I thank God for my mom and how far she's come, you know, because my mom, I was telling somebody else that like my mom for a while she kind of didn't get the mental health thing. She was kind of like, your life is fine,
Right? You got water. You got a car.
You have all these activities. You have everything you need. Like, what's wrong with your life? You know. And then she eventually became a mental health practitioner. You know, and in her life as a mental health practitioner, and in her world now, she's like, oh, I mean, she got it before she became a practitioner. Let me give her some credit.
Yeah.
Because she got it, and that's when she became a practitioner, right? But the more she works it, the more she's like, I can look back in retrospect on your life as my child, you know, and understand a little bit more about where you were coming from that I didn't understand at that time.
Wow.
But now looking back on it, I can. And I like have to shout out my mom one more time. And just say I'm grateful for her because, you know, a lot of African parents too, they're never going to come back to you and be like, I was wrong.
Yeah.
We don't even know what wrong is. Like, what is wrong?
Well, being wrong in African culture, for whoever is watching us, being wrong is, let's say you had a fight with your parents. If they cook food for you and then call you to come eat, that's what
acknowledging that you were wrong.
Yeah, right.
That's
do you basically have to speak? You know,
take it or leave it.
Yeah,
you want it or not, because that's what I did.
Right.
You know, yeah, in our cultures, and that's another thing too that I think like our generation is doing a good job of is being a little bit more self-aware and acknowledging our wrongs with each other, our relationships with each other, you know, and being able to say, you know what, I was wrong, I'm sorry, you know, and grow through those things. Because like, just like wrong doesn't exist for a lot of our parents. Sorry didn't exist growing up either. Like, we don't even know what that is. Like, how can I be sorry and you are a child? Like, who am I apologizing
Right.
to?
Especially because like age and respect is such a huge core part of who we are as Africans. You know, respect and age is kind of like right here together. You older, you automatically are given respect, which is not to say that it's particularly wrong, but in some ways what it means is that people get to get away with certain behaviors because they're older than you. Yeah. You don't get to speak to them about what they did wrong to you because they're older than you. And now what we have is in our community, some people just get away with the most heinous crimes. You should be under the jail. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happens. And so like, it's an unfortunate part of it, but you know.
And I think too, like, and y'all can tell me what you think about this, but I think that one thing though about that age and respect thing is that in my day-to-day life, I do feel like it helps me to give respect to people.
Yeah.
Just because I was already raised like you were older than me, so I should just respect you. So like even in grad school, where people were like, I'm gonna use this professor because we're cool, but people would be like Sangumbe, and I was like, what? Like
they call him by his first name?
Yes, they call him by his first name, and I'm like, professor.
That's crazy. Yeah.
If I wasn't saying professor, I'd be saying uncle. You know, you gotta say something.
No, because I struggle with that when I want to call everybody don't.
That's like uncle, auntie, you know. And so I think that like that has helped me at least, and I wonder if you feel the same way. But like even in professional spaces too, just being able to give respect to somebody, at least we give it at the beginning. And if you have proved that you don't deserve it, then we can revisit it, right? Yeah. But I think that in a lot of cultures, and I think specifically in American culture, which is, I think I was born and raised in America, but it's still a culture shock for me. Some things that are normal in American culture, like calling people by first names, talking directly to teachers, just any kind of way in school, just speaking anyhow, and just saying whatever you want, or just speaking recklessly in general in front of other people. Like, and I'm saying recklessly, and other people might think that the way that they speak or do things is normal. Or even people calling their parents by their first names. Like, I had classmates in high school who would be calling their moms Tina, and I'm like, are you okay? I even tried to call my mom by her first name as a joke. You should have seen what happened, but yeah, it wasn't you, you know? So it's like, we're able to kind of, I think that some of the things that we reflect on now as we're older, we're kind of like, these things are a little problematic. Yeah. But in a lot of ways, they also do help us to be able to behave a certain way and to also have morals and values, you know, that assist us in the work that we do. And I know like you and I both have people-facing roles. We deal with people. We've been on university campuses, and we can carry conversations with people in leadership. We know things with important people because we know how to respect people. We know how to have these set of values that had we not had the parents that we had and grown up when we grew up with the cultural values and cultural norms, it would be a little bit harder for us to do those things.
I agree. I think one of the privileges of being a third culture kid is the fact that I get to pick kind of different aspects of different cultures that I find to be very, very helpful to make me who I am. As much as I can critique, let's say, certain parts of African culture, there's a lot of things that I absolutely admire and I will always keep as a part of who I am, and I hope to pass on to my family. But then there's also parts that I've been able to get, let's say, from South Africa or some from American culture, and I find to be, because it's so useful. I think every culture has different things that can be very, very useful, and being able to have access to all those different culture, whether it's through church, or whether it's just growing up with my friends in South Africa, or now living in America and being in direct contact with the American culture, it helps me pick up things that I find to be morally correct for me and implement that and hopefully pass that on to my children. And that's really one of the privileges that I feel like it's really unique about me, and I get to pass it on. So like, yeah, some things I might not necessarily agree with, but some things I'm like, actually, I'm gonna take a bit of that, mix a little bit of this, put that all together, and this is who I am. So
you should, And I think even the things that we don't agree with, I think looking at the things that we don't agree with and obviously removing those things. But have y'all ever experienced that where there's a part of the thing that you don't agree with, but there's a part of it too that you're like, but I actually get it. You know, like I do get why it's like this. So maybe I'll keep a little bit of it, but I will do it differently than like somebody else did it, you know? So I didn't agree with it, but I get it and I'll do it differently. Kind of the same, like maintaining the principle of the concept or the whatever it is, you know? And I think that that's something that as a new generation of Africans, if I could call us that, I guess, we're kind of learning how to do that and take those things from all the things that have been passed down to us and use them now in what we're living in. I think even our parents had to do, like my mom had to do that, you know?
Yeah.
I think it is. I feel like most of our parents grew up in a society where they're probably taught not to speak, not to say anything, and especially like if your parents who grew up in colonialism, it's like, I'm sorry, but you don't have to speak, right? So like now, like I think one of the most important things for us as this like the new waves of like African people, it doesn't matter if you are in a diaspora or in Africa, trying to basically, like you guys say, right, pick and choose what you are carrying over and what you are leaving behind, right? Because not everything that we're part of colonial area or like in the 90s, 70 or 80 were good thing, right?
Yeah.
As some aspect to it, like dressing up.
Dress it correctly.
So like they're like dressing up. Like we used to I used to watch some documentary, not necessarily documentary, but like some I think it was like dance shows or something in the South African Republic where in the 90s people were dressing up, dancing and stuff, and now you're seeing people that are not really dressing up, and I'm like, how our parents ancestors were dressing up so good in the 80s. And what are we doing?
Why are you saying that word? You were so we're born in the 80s. Like my older brothers-in-law were born in the 80s. Like,
well,
go further back.
Yeah. Okay, so that back, right? And that's where as much as people are making fun of Congolese about like sapology and stuff, right? But like that's what sounds sorry. You know what I'm saying, right? Like when I'm seeing Congolese people dressing up, for me, what I'm saying is, okay, I might not have a big house, don't have a car, I don't have this, but this is a way I feel happy.
Yeah.
So like I have to dress up, right? And you guys are definitely right. Like you can, pick and choose and leave all that behind. Passing on to your children. Your children, we also pick and choose and pass it on to their children. So it's like it's what it is. And
actually talking about the like sapology and like personally me, like as a Congolese, everybody will expect, oh yeah, you need to dress a certain way, and so me, I don't really care how I dress. I just don't want to be naked when I go out. So like you, as you came here in the U.S. Have you ever? You say you didn't really grow up around like Congolese and stuff. When you get in that environment, do you ever feel that pressure to like, those stuff that,
Those
that's associated with Congolese. Yeah.
very super Congolese.
Do you ever felt that?
So I did grow up with Congolese, but like more so like at church, right? So like in the church, that's all the Congolese people that I knew. Because even though we lived in South Africa, we went to Congolese churches. So all the Congolese people I knew were mostly from church, and they'd say family who lived outside in different places. So yes, there is still that pressure to try to be as Congolese as possible. I mean, I've definitely had people who, let's say that I've particularly, say, dated and maybe were Congolese would say things like, well, you're not very Congolese. And I'm like,
What does that mean? What is that? Yeah.
What is like, because I'm almost certain every single Congolese woman that I know was very, very different. We were kind of like on this very, very wide spectrum. And like, what really is like, who's like the perfect middle? Like, is it Mbiliabel? I'm trying to figure out who is that ideal Congolese person. But, so yes, there was that pressure to try to be more Congolese. I remember one of the things was actually with language. So my father and my parents taught us French and Lingala, right? So we grew up speaking French at home, but then we would go speak English and stuff outside of the home. But then you're spending most of your time in school. So at some point, it does kind of digress back home, like kind of goes back when you go home and you're speaking in English. So we started losing a bit of like that French and stuff. And so, but Lingala, my mom specifically would speak to us in Lingala, right? But because we're not really practicing it a lot, obviously when I did pick it up, I spoke with a accent. And anybody who did not grow up in Congo knows, like when you speak Lingala, it's very easy to tell that you're not from Guinea or you're not directly, like you didn't live in Congo. And so that was one of the things that I struggled with, was comfortably speaking Lingala or whatever, because oftentimes I was judged on how Congolese I was based off of how well I spoke with a certain accent. So there were times where I got to a point where I remember people used to make fun of how I spoke Lingala. They'd be like, you speak Lingala like a Senegalese. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, you heard of Senegalese? I'm looking from exactly. So, because I think there's a small population of Senegalese people who lived in Congo and they spoke with a particular accent. They're like, you speak like that. I'm like, you know how rude that is. But anyways, so because of that, it made me fearful of comfortably speaking with Congolese people. So automatically it alienated me from the Congolese community. They're like, I'm an apoto. Like, if anybody's Congolese knows what that means, you know, you're from the West type of thing. And so that was hard. And I felt like automatically I felt a little bit alienated from my own community because of language, because of foods, for example. Some foods I just didn't enjoy. It's not necessarily because it's bad. I just don't enjoy it.
Like, they treat you like it's a crime.
Can I know my offense?
Like literally, they would put me under the jail for that. I swear.
And I'm not gonna lie. Like, I used to be so judgmental of mbinzo. Mbinzo is like the black caterpillar that they fried.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just can't get with it. You know, and that's just me. But, you know, things like that are still like at the core of the culture. And I respect, people who eat it, absolutely. But it's just not my preference. But people would judge you based on small things like that and alienate you from your identity. And so, yes, there was definitely some pressures to show up as more. But then at some point I was like, you know what? I came here and I actually bettered my Lingala because I was surrounded by Congolese friends. And I was like, I want to speak like them. So I just started listening to everything they would say and I would just like repeat it. And then I became more comfortable with it. Also, I spoke to my grandmother only in French and Lingala. I'm not going to speak to her in English. And so, yes, whatever version of me that I felt most comfortable with that still made me feel like a Congolese woman, that's what I stick to. At this point, if people feel like I'm not Congolese enough, that's their problem. I really do not care, because at the end of the day, like, I'm a product of my environment where I grew up, who I was surrounded by, and you can't arrest me for that. Like, what you gonna do about it? So, quite frankly, yes, is there the pressure to show up and do more things to perform? Yes, but I also have adopted this idea that, you know what, I am who I am. Even when it comes to the dressing thing, like sapology is such a prevalent thing in our community. And I love it because it's a simple pleasures for some people, dressing up nice. What is that quote? Dressing well is a form of respect. And I could see why people admire it and they want to show a certain, like, a creativity to themselves through their outfits. For me, obviously, I'm not a sapeur. Obviously, I still try to dress well because I feel like that's a very core Congolese thing. But it also doesn't make me any less or more Congolese because of it. I think everybody should just stick to what they feel most comfortable with, respect the culture, and pass on what they can.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that one of the themes that keep on coming up is the diaspora. It's going to be a long conversation, and one thing that I'm thinking of as you're speaking, right? You talk a lot about your community. That are around you, and there's one term. It's if I don't say it right, you can correct me in the comment. But it's it's Ubuntu.
Yeah, right? That's a South African concept.
I am because we are.
Yes.
So, what do you think? How can the diaspora use this concept to start moving forward?
That's a very good question. I think for one, I'm, like I said, I'm a product of my environment, and as a result, I cannot help who I am, but I also do think I still have something very, very valuable to add to my community. The experiences that I've picked up from South Africa, the experiences that I've picked up from being in America, the education that I have, and the education that I have from my parents who are Congolese people, who grew up in Congo, who know what it's like to be Congolese. I feel like all of that is still relevant. I feel like it's really unfair when we hold people from the diaspora, or Banaputu, as we like to call them in Congo, almost like as criminals for being from the West. And it's not necessarily the truth. Most people who migrate, they migrate because they have to. You know, whether it is because of political issues, whether it is because of economical issues, or whatever it may be, people move because there is a reason why. And so the children that are as a product of that, you know, they don't choose the environment that they're born into. They're just born into it. So it's important that we recognize, one, that factor, that it's not by choice, and two, and if they do decide to stay there, that there is still something valuable that they can add to our community from their lived experiences from the West. And not to say necessarily that something from the West is innately good, but what it is to say is that all of our experiences, our languages, our opportunities, our resources are valuable. If we really want to move forward as a community and rebuild our country, rebuild our community, and try to see our country get to a better place, every single person's resources, experience, and whatever it is that they bring to the table is really, really valuable and important. So if we can recognize, okay, you are because I am, if there's a difference that we have that we can share, that can also be valuable to whatever it is, the final goal that we're trying to get to. So if we can recognize those differences and also recognize the similarities, because we're a lot more similar than we are different. A lot of us share the same names, the same cultural values, the same dress codes, for example. A lot of us are more similar. I think we tend to focus more on the differences than the similarities. And once we do find those similarities and when we meet halfway, I feel like we're going to have more productive conversations rather than, well, because you speak French a particular way, or because you speak this particular way, then you're different. No. There's still something. I'm still a Kalambayi, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of millions of other Kalambayis in Congo and all that type of stuff. So that's what we should focus on. If we can focus on those similarities and recognizing that a lot of us are where we are not by choice, then I feel like it's going to help us move forward a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessi. Thank you for being with us. We have a wrap-up question that we like to ask. And it is, what is your favorite food item from your culture? Like, tell us what it is, but also tell us what it is. Like, what's in it. Then let everybody know why they should try it.
So one of my favorite things is chakamadesu. It's basically beans and pondu. Pondu is basically cassava leaves that is pounded and made into a stew. So the beans are cooked separately from the pondu, and then they're cooked together with like spices and onions and oil. And typically you have it with rice and some sort of like protein, like fish with tomson. You can have it with fish, or you could have it with soso, which is chicken. And it bangs so bad. I love it so much. I could have it 6 days a week, honestly. It's so good. On the 7th day, I'd like to have some pasta. But it's so good. I really do enjoy it. I really think Congo has such a really unique food scene, and I feel like we're able to kind of explore. We eat fish, we eat red meats, we eat chickens, and we just have such a very, very diverse palate, and I really do enjoy that about us. So if you can go to your local, you know what? My mama cooks really well.
They do cook well, but
okay. But yeah, that's a really like a meal that I really, really do enjoy. And also ndaba, which is goat meat. I feel like most African countries do enjoy goat meat. We make it on like mbabula. But we have it like on like a braai. That is a South African term. See, this is what I'm struggling. Yeah, barbecue, girl. That's it. On a barbecue with some spices, with some kwanga on this. I'm not a kwanga person, but probably like some before something. I think it's acquired taste.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And texture.
Drag me for
no, taste and texture. Taste and texture. I feel
texture. Yeah. It's a tanginess. It's still too tangy. Yeah. But not knocking it in general. But yeah, foods like that I really, really do enjoy. And there's so many people who make it really, really well. So I hope that people get the chance to experience it as well.
Well, what is the name of the food?
The second one, the first one.
The first one.
Oh, chakamadesu.
You talk about similarity in my country, in the South African Republic, we call it mandesu. We cook it the same way, rice and fish and everything. So
see?
Yeah.
we're more similar than we are different, yo. Come on, we are the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
So what's the end goal? Like, where do you see yourself being in the next 10 years? Like, are you seeing yourself in a Hollywood movie or something like that? Like,
I'm just thinking about tomorrow. 10 years. I'm trying to graduate. That's a great question. I think I do see myself, one, making an impact in the world in some space. I think I know for sure I want to continue to work with refugees and migrants to some capacity, whether it is with the government, who knows, whether it is with a nonprofit organization or an ING of some sort. I do hope to continue to work in this space and evolve, especially maybe influencing decision-making to some degree. I think I really do hope to one day end up where I can heavily impact, especially because I started from the ground up, so I can see a lot of things that require some change. So I'm hoping to end up there. But I also kind of want to continue within like the fashion modeling, maybe pageantry space. If I end up as Miss USA, y'all vote for me. If I end up as the president, who knows? I'm not quite sure, but I do know that I'm going to end up where God wants me to be. So I'm not sure where that final goal is just yet. So yeah.
Full stop. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in today to Beyond the Warriors podcast. Please leave us a comment below and let us know what generational things you're not taking into your generation. Let us know what you're leaving behind and what you're bringing with you, and why. Maybe we can cover some of these the next time we talk. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Jessi.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Be sure to like and subscribe and to follow us on all forms of social media and to listen to our next episode wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.